In the last video, I paused at the point where I had copied a directory, but learnt that this is a shallow copy, meaning none of the directory's contents were copied. In this video, I want to show you a way to copy the entire contents of a directory or a deep copy. I've got my project open from the last video, Managing Files, and I'm in the main class. I'll create a private static void method and call it recurseCopy. This will take two arguments, a path, the source, and the target path, which is the directory it will get copied to. This time I'll have this method declare a throws clause, throwing any IO exception, since this code could fail in multiple different ways. I'll start by making a shallow copy of the source path. Next, I'll check if the source path is a directory. If it is, I'll get the contents by using files.list. That returns a stream, which I'll call children. Don't forget, for any method on files that returns a stream, it's super important to wrap it in a try with resources block so you don't create a resource leak if it's not properly closed. I use the streams to list operation to create a list of path. I can chain a for each to that and pass a lambda expression. For each path, I wanted to call this method main.recurseCopy recursively, meaning I'm calling it from inside itself. I'll pass the current path to this method. For the target though, I need to adjust the name of the targeted child path. I can do this with the resolve method. This code won't compile as is. I'm getting an error on main.recurseCopy, and that's because this method throws an IO exception. I have to surround it with a try-catch block, which makes the code a bit uglier. Before I invoke this, I want to just explain what the resolve method is doing here. For relative paths, the source and target paths are joined or concatenated when you use this method. As I iterate through my nested folders, I need to create a mirrored structure below the parent folder, which is the target, so I join the target with the last part of the path name. For children that are subfolders, the last part is the unqualified or simple path name. In our case here, it will be data. Okay, that's my recurseCopy method. Getting back to the main method, I'll replace the call to files.copy with this one. I'll run this code. It runs without errors and gives me the message as it did before, directory copied to resources. Let's see what that folder looks like in the project panel. I can see the resources folder there, that it was created again, and I'll open that up. You can see that everything that was in the files folder, including the JSON file and the subfolder, data, is now in the resources directory. That's good. That means this code is working. What happens if I rerun this though when the resources folder now exists? Let me do that. You can see I get a file already exists exception thrown by the recurseCopy method. The copy method includes an overloaded version which lets you specify an option to copy a path even if it already exists. I'll change my recurse method to show you that. I'll add another argument to the files.copy method, and this time I'll pass it an enum value from the standard copy option enum, and this is called replace_existing. This means a copy will be done even if the targeted path exists. Now, I'll run this again. I still get an error, but this time it's a different exception. It's a directory not empty exception. Similarly to the issue of being unable to do a deep copy, I can't replace an existing directory that already has content. One solution would be to delete the target directory if it exists, so I'll go back to my main method and I'll try to do that. I'll first check to see if the directory exists. If it does, I'll try to delete it. Okay, now I'll run this. Still, I get the exception, directory not empty exception. As it turns out, I can't delete a directory if it has contents either. If I wanted to delete a directory, I'd have to recursively delete all the contents of its subfolders, similar to what I did with the recurseCopy method. There's another delete method called deleteIfExists, which replaces this whole if statement. That looks cleaner, but if I run it, I've still got the same problem. I'll copy my recurseCopy method and paste it right below recurseCopy. I'll rename it to recurseDelete. For deleting, I just need one path for the method argument, and that would be the targeted deletion path. I'll remove that files.copy statement. I'll change source to target in the two statements that use source. I'll change the call to main.recurseCopy to main.recurseDelete and remove the second argument, so just passing the stream path p. Okay, so I'm not actually deleting anything yet. The right place for the delete is after this if statement. This is when the recursive operations have completed. If I placed it before the if statement, I'd simply get exceptions saying the directory is not empty. I'll go back to my main method and remove the delete if exists and call this instead. I'll run that. My console output simply says directory copied to resources. I can see resources, and again it matches files directory. For good measure, I'll add another subfolder under data and call it new data. And I'll run my code again. I'll examine the resources folder. You can see new data. The folder I added is now in the resources folder, confirming that the resources folder matches files. In the past couple of examples, I've shown you how to copy, rename and delete files, as well as recursively copy and delete directories. Next, I want to explore a method on both the reader and the input stream interfaces called transfer to. This method was added to input stream in JDK 9 and to the reader interface in JDK 10. Let me set up an example of using this in the main method. I'll set up a buffered reader to my student activity JSON that's now in the files subfolder. I'll pass a new file reader to the buffered reader. I'll also create a new writer, a print writer, which I've said, if I pass a string to it, will create a buffered writer for me underneath. I want my output file to be called students-backup.json. Here, I'll call reader.transferTo and pass it my writer. I need the IO exception catch clause as usual. If I run this code and I examine my project pane, I'll see my new file, students-backup.json. If I open that file, I can see I've simply made a copy of the JSON file here. In essence, I've used reader.transferTo to do what the files.copy method did. That probably leads you to the question, which is better? Well, when you're working with files, you'll probably want to stick to files.copy. Files.copy takes advantage of the file system provider to do the work as efficiently as possible. The reader.transfer method might be more efficient for very large files, especially if a file is being copied across different network drives. Where the transfer to method really shines, though, is when one of your input streams differs from the output stream type. Let me give you a couple of examples. I'm going to use functionality in the java.net package to make a request to a website to get a JSON response. I want to first comment out that last code before I start this. I'll create a local variable that has the URL to request data from the United States Census Bureau, which will return the population for each state. I'll create a uniform resource identifier or URI, which is a class in java.net, and I'll create an instance passing the factory create method, the URL string. Now, a URL, which I'm sure you're familiar with, is always a URI. But there's another subcategory of URI, which includes uniform resource names. I'll be getting into all of this later in the networking section. For now, I want to use URI because it provides me with handy methods to get an input stream based on the URI. In a try with resources block, I'll set up a variable URL input stream. I'll set that to my URI dot to URL method chaining open stream. This opens a stream to the URL, making the request and retrieving the response, which in this case is JSON. I can call transfer to on that URL, input stream, and pass system.out to that, which is just a specialized output stream. And I'll add the IO exception. If I run this code, I should see the JSON response being printed directly to my console. Here, I have the state name, the population from 2019, and a state numeric ID. Now, I'll do something similar, but this time I'll request this data, but then dump it into a file. I'll set up a variable called JSON path, and this will be a file named US population by state.txt. In this case, I'm going to create a reader to writer scenario, so my reader will be new input stream reader. I'll pass the code I used previously, URI dot to URL dot OpenStream. I'll get my writer by using files.newBufferedWriter and pass that my JSON path variable. I'll call reader.transferTo and pass it my writer. Running this code, I can see a new file in my project pane, US population by state.txt. If I open that, I see the same data that was printed to my console. This is pretty handy stuff if you need to query resource data from external sites because it allows you to quickly stream it to a local file. Now, let's say I really want this data to be a CSV file and not JSON. I can use the transfer to method with a customized writer that will do a transformation first. This is a little more complex, but it's pretty interesting code and I want you to see it. I'll start by copying that last code block and pasting a copy just below it. I'll first remove the writer statement. I'll replace that with the declaration of a print writer instance, passing that a file name, US population by state.csv. Now, on the next line, where I have writer, I want to replace that. I'll create an anonymous class, which will have the type of writer, so new writer empty parens, then opening and closing brackets. I've got an error, and if I hover over that, I see that writer is abstract and that I need to implement its abstract methods. I'll select implement methods. It will have all the abstract methods selected, which is what I want, so I'll press OK. Now, I have the method signatures for 3 methods. For the flush and close methods, I'll just delegate to my local variable writers methods. But for the first method, the write method, I want to do some transformation here before I pass off to the writer variable. First, I'll create a local string variable called JSON string, and I can create that from the arguments passed to this method, the character buffer, the offset, and the length. I can replace the left square bracket character with a space character, and I'll trim this at the end. My other option is to use replace all. The first argument is a regular expression, and since the closing square bracket is a meta character, I'll need to escape it with a pair of backslashes. This statement and the one above remove all the square brackets in the JSON response. Finally, I'll delegate to my local variables write method. I'll run my code. After I see the state population data in the console, I'll see that the CSV file was created in my project pane. I'll open that. You can see I was able, in a few short lines of code, to grab information from a web URL, transform it, and write it to an output file in a different format. Later, when I cover threads, I'll show you another example using this method that will transfer input from the console to a log file. You can see that this method lets you transfer data from one type of source to another, making the task very easy. I'm going to bring this video to a close. I've covered most of the basic functionality you'll use when dealing with files and file systems. In the next couple of videos, I want to talk about more advanced file topics. These include random access files and serialization. First though, I've got a challenge for you.